Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight we'll be continuing our, we'll pick up where we left off last week, which is about midway through chapter 6. So as always, I would ask that if there are any volunteers that would like to read their version of their translation of Sun Tzu, The Art of War, go ahead and type exclamation point in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom. And we can get started with James. Thank you for offering.
You're welcome. I just cleaning my glasses because I was at the optometrist today, and I only can see things about half as well, surprisingly. So I'll just get started. Number 5. Knowing the place and time of the coming battle, we may concentrate from the greatest distances in order to fight. But if neither time nor place be known, then the left wing will be impotent to succor the right. The right equally impotent to succor the left. The van unable. Did we read this one? I might be in the wrong chapter. I'm in weak points and strong.
It's a weak and strong, and start with
I'm trying to open it.
knowing the place to fight.
Okay, that was where I was.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me go on from where I was. It's being unable to succoring the right, equally important to succoring the left. The van unable to relieve the rear, or the rear unable to support the van. How much more if the furthest portions of the army are anything under 100 li apart? And even if the nearest are separated by several li. Although according to my estimate, the soldiers of Yue exceed our own in number. That shall advantage them nothing in the matter of victory. I say then that the victory can be achieved, though the enemy be stronger in numbers. We may prevent him from fighting.
Thank you, James. Would anybody else like to read their version of Sun Tzu's chapter 6.5, I would say. Unfortunately, I have the same version as James, so I'm not.
Joe, what number would that be? Yeah, in the Giles, I think it is.
Possibly, I would think 5.
Does anyone have the non-Giles?
Okay, I probably have another one because I was in airport.
Yeah, I have a non-Giles version.
Okay, please, Madam. Yeah.
Okay. It's going to take me 1 sec to find the chapter. All right, so this is the one that starts with, thus if one can anticipate the place and the day of battle, he can march 1,000 li to join the battle. But if one cannot anticipate either the place or the day of battle, his left flank cannot even rescue his right, or his right his left. His front cannot even rescue his rear, or his rear his front. How much more is this so when your reinforcements are separated by at least a few li, or even tens of li? The way I estimate it, even though the troops of Yue are many, what good is this to them in respect to victory? Thus it is said, victory can be created. For even though the enemy has the strength of numbers, we can prevent him from fighting us. Is that the end of that section?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so I have mentioned, okay, first, that's kind of a review what we have been through in this chapter. And this chapter, the title usually is the weak and the strong. And I think I should call it what is virtual and what is real, or virtuality and reality. So that's the title I give to the chapter 6. Okay, so just quick review from last week. Last week we talked about a few things on the chapter 6. Start from the taking initiative, right? You need to active, not reactive. So you decide to attack or defend. And then when you want to attack, you want to make sure that the concept is, I think the Sun Tzu here use 10 and 1 basics, close to our concept, divide and conquer. That's from last week. And then this week we are continue on the paragraph 5. Basics is talking about knowing the place and the date, and then tell you the number doesn't matter as long as you can divide and conquer, and you know the date and the place to fight. The number doesn't matter. So that's the basic, that's the message for this paragraph. So here's the translation. Therefore, knowing the place to fight and knowing the date to fight, we can fight from a great distance. Not knowing the place to fight, nor knowing the date to fight, our left wing cannot save the right wing. The right wing cannot save the left wing. The front cannot save the rear cannot save the front. How can we fight from a great distance, tens of miles away, or even fight from within just a mile? So I think the message is clear. And the second verses, according to my estimation, though the soldiers of the state of Yue are great in number, how can their numbers give them a winning advantage? So when we read Sun Tzu, we hardly need historical background, and probably except here, you talk about state of Yue, okay? If I don't have a map here, but you can imagine in China during that time, Sun Tzu is from the north, the state of Qi. Okay, you can picture three states from north to south. Qi, and the south of Qi is Wu, and the south of Wu is Yue. Okay, so Sun Tzu is from the state of Qi, and then he, I think he escaped and went to the state of Wu, going south. Okay, and then apparently this writing is probably writing when he wrote it when he was in the state of Wu, because Wu and the Yue on the south of Wu constantly have war. Wu and the Yue constantly have war. So he probably has fighting against the state of Yue in his mind. And then Yue is in the deep south. So the weather is kind of warm, and in general, they have more people. So the number usually is their advantage. That's why he said, according to my estimation, though the soldiers of the state of Yue are great in number, can their number give them a winning advantage? Of course, the answer is no, because as long as you know the date, you know the place to fight, and you know how to divide and conquer, their number doesn't have advantage. So the last phrase, I will conclude the victory can be achieved even though the enemy are great in number. We force them to have no place to fight. So that's on this paragraph. So let's give some time to discuss, and then any comment?
So yeah, folks, go ahead and raise your hand in Zoom or type exclamation point in the chat to share your thoughts on verse 5 and chapter 6. So we'll go first with James, followed by David.
Yeah, this chapter reminds me a little bit of, this section reminds me a little bit of this, the idea that the offense has a advantage because of initiative, because of the initiating advantage. There's also the idea of using the strategy. Of course, somebody mentioned divide and conquer, but there's also the idea of forcing the enemy's forces to be compressed geographically. So I think that's what he means by time and place. If you can catch them in a position where they don't have a geographical, they have a geographical disadvantage. They're going to have to compress they have greater forces, but if you can force them to have to compress their forces by going through the equivalent of a canyon or perhaps utilizing some of the techniques that were mentioned in the earlier chapters, this will give you some advantages. He's also mentioning here the fact that you have to have balance. You have to have a balancing attack and a balancing defense. The right side is not necessarily going to be able to help the left, and the rear is not necessarily going to be able to help the front in all situations. So those situations have to be accounted for. But those are ones those are situations where he says you're going to be rendered helpless if you don't know where and the place and the time to have the initiative to fight. So once again, I'm kind of reminded of Trenton, New Jersey, where George Washington gained the advantage on the critical, gained the advantage in a critical battle on Christmas Eve when the British soldiers were all drunk and unavailable for mustering to battle. So that of course is the best example of surprise and initiative. I'm sure there's really good ones in other wars though, also possibly in World War II. Yeah. There are a lot of people that study war, and I imagine it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, some of the comments, because you think about it, a lot of people have studied this book and applied it to many different areas in life. Specifically, a lot of people in business have used this text in one way or another. And so to your point, as far as timing is concerned, timing is everything, in the sense that if you come up with an idea, it can be the best idea in the world, but if the timing is off, then it is not going to necessarily take hold. Just as you may miss the window of opportunity to present your idea, you may have an idea that needs to be acted on right away. So one example, and just a present day example I'll just provide, is a lot of people think something like Facebook would be a good example of that. If they had not moved at that particular moment in time and captured the social networking market, that would have been that someone else would have obviously moved in, or even a bigger company. And I'm just illustrating that as an example of timing, and individuals in that particular instance had to leave college. They had to make financial decisions. They had to go with their gut. So that there's, and if they hadn't, then they wouldn't necessarily have had the same success that they've had today. So that's just one example that we can think of in terms of how timing is important in all aspects of strategy. So thank you for that, James. Very much appreciate it. David's next.
Right, thanks. So in this chapter, we're looking at the weak versus strong aspects of your force and your opponent's force. And Jason is calling it virtual and real. That's a little confusing to me. I think of it as the apparent force and what's really going to function as force. So maybe that's what virtual you're getting at. It appears like, for example, we're confronting a large force, but really how functionally large is it? How big an area can it maintain and protect? So we're looking at the strategic game and psychological game at the same time. We're not discussing a psychological here because he did that in the last section, but it's part of what your attack contains, is a strategic and a psychological component of advantage. So the same force used properly is going to accomplish a lot more with the right pinpoint focus, if it's, to have the maximal result. So and that is the information component, that you know what's going on in your enemy, and the enemy does not, because your skill is hiding. Your skill is invisibility and shifting where your forces are in a way that does not let on to your enemy, so that even the smallest person fighting the biggest person, if you can hit the right place, if you can feint your way to the weak spot, you're going to have the greatest effect. So he's concluding in the end that it's not the numbers of your force that is your strength. You can win if you can control the engagement to that degree with your knowledge, that you can find or lead the dividing of the opponent's forces and unify your forces, and not attack where you know they're unified, and go after their weakness and make them think and make them faint, so they don't attack you where you're weak. That this is the game you're playing, on weak versus strong, and it doesn't have to do with numbers alone. It's what's really functional at the point you're going to attack.
Very interesting, David. I mean, actually, something that just a comment really briefly that we were talking about with some people earlier today was this the idea of leverage, and how essentially you want to reduce the amount of force that you actually have to exert. And so if you think about it in terms like that, the timing allows you to do that, as well as the numbers of individuals that you actually need to precisely, kind of move in and actually win. So therefore, numbers are mitigated by using that same concept as your kind of leverage.
Well,
so
for the time purpose, can you lead the enemy into a shape that gives you that leverage advantage, right?
Exactly, and in this directly to the aspect that we covered a little bit earlier in the book. So if you think about it from that perspective, that is, using the same principle. So yeah, I really like that. So thank you. Next up, we have Danny.
Hi, I'm plagiarizing a comment that I learned from a scholar a long time ago.
That's great, good art. What is it? Good artist.
Plagiarism goes a long way. Anyway, so I often the comment from one of my teachers before was more that in reading chapter 6, we often refer back to the thought pattern in chapter 5, utilizing energy. And this is more like a flowing of energy. And whether as a commander in a battlefield, is how fluid that you can really use your energy. And this energy can be a form of leverage, as mentioned before, whether it's a slope hill that can assist into having a smaller force defeating a bigger army, by getting the upper ground, or using other potential, other factors, weather, terrains, rivers, path, certain things. And it really comes back to the thought pattern, if you would, to, I guess, Tao Te Ching to a certain degree, whereas there's the strength of fluidity in the formless, the void, versus the actual tangible form. Well, you have your opponent with, a high amount of soldiers, enemies, that's solid, tangible, solid, material form, if you would, right? Whereas on the other hand, if you are to exploit the formless, such as the distance between, a group of troops to their neighboring troops, exploit other factors, other parameters of the battlefield that you can assess the details and attack when when either, like, say, their troops are too far apart to assist one another, that kind of thing, then you're attacking the formless weak points that even they themselves are not aware of. So the thought pattern is really more in, I guess, how as a commander, even in more application in business or application in real life management and whatnot, is when we sit down and we assess other factors, formless factors that may not be apparent to our opponent, or maybe at one point or another not apparent to us, but we exploit the formless and fluidly fill our strategy into it, then the water takes form in the formless. And it's positional, it's timing and positional. And as long as that space we occupy first, we reach there first, then we gain the upper hand.
I
plagiarized, and I probably missed the mark.
What was it? That's the famous saying. It's a good artist copy, great artist steal. So there you go. So that was a great comment. And so there you, and that was, I just stole it. With, and especially the aspect of the Tao Te Ching that you had brought in, where the advantage is in the space as opposed to the actual force itself. And that's a profound concept. We were actually reading the Tao Te Ching, going back over it the other evening, where one of the, I think 9 or 11, I forget, with the spokes in the wheel. Jason might remember better than myself. It was 9 or 11, but it was telling you, it was essentially illustrating the value of space. And if you think about not only the value of space, the value of space and time is both illustrated in this, and that's a profound concept, right? And I see somebody put in the chat that we're talking about physics in a way, and absolutely the case, space and time, right? So we're integrating some of those same concepts when you're talking about and it's also interesting so far as that if you think about it, the Sun Tzu knew this intuitively without necessarily all the calculations to support it. But I find that to be interesting so far as the value of intuition in and of itself. So sometimes we often overlook that. So I really appreciated your comments. So thank you. Go ahead, Mark.
Thanks, Joseph. I want to pick up right where you left off, Joe, about space and time. Because here, knowing the place and the time of the coming battle This takes us back, I think, to chapter 1, verses 7 and 8, about heaven and earth. And I want to ask Jason if we can correlate here, place with earth and time with heaven, as we learned in chapter 1. And I think those who have mentioned not only the fluidity of motion, but how valleys might be better than mountains, I think James pointed to that, is also mentioned under the discussion of earth, which involves geography, distance. He said there in chapter 1, the open plain versus the valley. And time, I think we should understand in a very expansive sense, as he said in Giles, it's 1:7. I don't know exactly what other number it is, but time has to do, heaven has to do with time. And I'm just going back to
times and seasons as well, right? It talks about, that's correct.
Night and day, cold and heat, times and seasons. So it's an expansive sense of time, I think we can learn from this. And my only other comment was about the argument in I forget what number it is right here. How much more so in the Giles translation? This is in 620, but I'm not sure what other number it is in when you see them all together. How much more so if the furthest portions of the army are anything under 100 li apart? I'm not sure if that's ambiguous, if it's referring to the enemy's army, but the form of argument here, how much more so, is what we would call an a fortiori. So I think it's interesting to point out that Sun Tzu is relying on forms of argument that are found all across the world, including the Bible and so on. Where
great comments as always. I mean, I interrupted, please. I thought you were done.
I'm done.
Oh, I apologize there. If I cut you off early. Oh, no, I mean, great comments as always. Very much appreciated when you're talking about times and distance, how to travel, because actually a lot about positioning as well. And that's one important part about this chapter. It's actually taking a more active approach and a divide and conquer, and actually how you position your forces, which talks about, again, that limits the ability or the amount that you would actually have to travel as well. As far as the, again, you're right, heaven does, as you mentioned, the time element of it, talks about it explicitly. So I think that's something that we've covered. Again, you can kind of see one of the things that's I think really interesting about this text in general is that if you outline the principles themselves, you can always relate back to them in one way, shape, or form. How much so is a very deep question as well, because that's something that somebody needs to ask themselves in almost any kind of endeavor, I would say, even if it were and I tend to think in things of maybe a business endeavor, but yes, you would think, how much so? How much is this going to cost me? And so, because there's a limited amount of resources, allocate these resources, and that's what this is essentially all about. Allison.
Joe, I just wanted to mention, because you said a limited number of resources. In chapter 5, verse 6, when he talks about indirect tactics, efficiently applied are inexhaustible as heaven and earth, unending as the flow of rivers. Sorry.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, what this is making me think of, I don't remember exactly the name of it. I keep thinking Battle of Jamestown, but there was one battle, that could be wrong, in the Revolutionary War towards the end of the war. And basically what they did was, you know, this whole idea of like the right flank, the left flank, they kind of pushed them into one area so that they're surrounded by water on 3 sides. And they only had to guard one side, and they basically just waited them out until they just started running out of things. So I think what's kind of interesting, like when you're, you know, thinking about applying physics, it's not just the physics of this army versus this one, but really using land as part of that, land and water, and using everything around you to help you. So like there's nowhere to go, because then they had you know, the Navy out in the water. So they're just trapped. So I think, you know, it's all, I don't know, just kind of like related to that. I wish I could remember the name of the battle. I was trying to find it. I don't know.
Are you talking about Yorktown, where the French-
Yorktown, isn't it?
yeah, that ended the war, but it was a big success because the British Navy would have been there and destroyed us, except for the fact that they had been confronted and the French had taken over in the Chesapeake, and the French came down and
That's
locked.
right.
That's right.
Right, yeah. Yeah, but I remember it was like near the Chesapeake and the whole surrounded by water. That was it, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. And again, I think this is again highlights what other assets are around that you can actually use. That, you know, you're talking about the land and the geography itself, which is something we talk about continuously here. And that is something that would allow a smaller force and kind of levels the playing field, no pun intended, in a way that you're kind of to enable you. And this comes back to the other concept of leverage that we were talking about a little bit earlier. So how to best leverage your forces. So thank you. Go ahead, Jason. Thank you.
I'd like to comment on Mark. Okay, great, Mark. You notice talk about the fortiori. Okay, he used, and then I also noticed in Sun Tzu. Okay, in the this Art of War compared to other ancient texts, this one has more logic built inside. So that's why when I do this one, I will do it different than Confucius Analect, because each chapter they have a certain logic going behind, and then I think that's interesting, you know, in this one. And I also kind of thinking this one probably somebody write it later time, not during that time, so they have a much better logic built inside. But that's just my thought. But I'm glad Mark pay attention on the logic on this one, and if you keep pay attention, you will find out the writing is much well structured. A lot of time you have like a 4-point, 5-point, 4 situation, you know, 5 principle, this kind of thing. And we don't see that often in other texts. So I think that's one thing. And another thing I'd like to comment also from Mark is about the time. I just have a little bit disagree on the situation. I on this paragraph talking about know the time and know the place to fight and know the date to fight, associate, connected to the first chapter. When Sun Tzu talk about 5 things, 5 affairs, the Tao, the heaven, the earth, the general, and the method. So I don't see here when we talk about time is related to heaven. Even on the first chapter, we talk about heaven as a time, but this time is not a specific time. I say in the chapter 1, we talk about heaven. It's more like talking about a season, unpredictable situation. usually is timing. For example, we don't know. Tomorrow is going to snow. It's going to sunshine or a strong wind. What direction of wind. In the ancient time, lack of the weather report, it's unpredictable. So on the chapter 1, when we talk about heaven, even I associate it with time. I think it's more on the unpredictable time. And in this chapter, when we say knowing the day, basics, it's talking about as a general, you need to be active to pick the time to fight. I think that's the subtle difference. And I just don't want to get confused here. There's another thing, and the basics is coming from David. Thank you, David, to tell me the honest opinion. And you said my translation title, the virtuality and realities confuse you. Okay. And I really like to see everybody's opinion, because in Gaio's translation on chapter 5, it called energy. Okay. And then this chapter called the weak and the strong. And it flow very well, very understandable for the Western people, because chapter 5 talk about energy, okay? And then this chapter is talk about number doesn't count, and then you have the weak, and then we think about David and the giant, and the weak can fight the strong, and it totally makes sense, okay, and logically makes sense. But unfortunately, I think, okay, Huang know Chinese, as other people know Chinese. I think you know Chinese, you probably would disagree on the correctness of these 3 words translation, because last week I take 30 minutes to try to present what's the meaning of 是, which is not equal to energy. And this week, we have the title in Chinese called 虚 and 实, and usually translate as weak and strong, or some translation translate as emptiness and fullness. And they all miss the point. Okay, so I will say this week's the so-called weak and the strong, the best translation so far, as I will translate as egg and the pebble, okay, because egg and the pebble look identical, and the egg is empty inside, and the pebble is solid. So when you want to attack, you have to decide which one is egg, which one is pebble, right? So I think that's the key here. So that's why I translate as what is virtual, what is real, borrow from virtual reality. But of course, it's confusing, but I will, if anybody have a good suggestion and how do you think, about the translation, I really like to know, because it's really bothered me for these 3 words. I think that's the most difficult 3 words to translate in Chinese. Yeah.
Thank you. That is a great image, because it's so visual. It's a really it's like metaphor. It's a perfect thing to call it, egg and pebble. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and actually, if you are writing the metaphysics in philosophy, you probably want to write as appearance and the reality. That's probably another way to.
Not gonna lie, I kind of want to suck his cock. Like, oh my god, nigga.
Not Joe, you got that
It's time-
guy.
Thanks, Amy.
He's in a weak position, I'd say.
He's our real follower. So
I thought I was thinking he was going to call me an egg.
He didn't know he's. We're like, we can't be shaken by these guys like nothing.
I got to tell you really quickly, I appreciate Jason pointing out that distinction with time, because that's something that actually I didn't see as well when I was initially kind of looking at the principle of heaven. So that was that was very helpful for me as well. And if anybody has any suggestions with any of the three words that Jason requested, please feel free to raise your hand and share your thoughts. So next up, we have Danny.
I resonate to the statement from Mark regarding the unlimited potential of heaven, of nature in that sense, and talking about leverage. I mean, there's always, I mean, you talk back into like ancient warfare, talk about general, like say Han Sen, you know, like the early early Han Dynasty type thing. You know, you get feats where generals would use, say, like the water force of a dam to compensate for their weak number of troops to defeat a larger force, or utilizing terrains like a horseshoe, you know, to force enemy's troop into the horseshoe and therefore bottleneck the troop, that kind of thing. So I mean, to assess whether a weak point or strength, I mean, this really brings me back to I guess a little passage I read from a book from Malcolm Gladwell, David versus Goliath, and it analyzed you know, the common story that we all know, David versus Goliath. You had a giant infantry guy who is big and deadly, you know, in close combat. But because of his bulk, you know, limited movement, and also, you know, his eyesight and whatnot, he's not able to see a little guy like David running around. And apparently David here, you know, even though he's small in stature, he's pretty much trained with a slingshot, you know, and then you know, a throw from his slingshot could be like a deadly bullet, you know, a bullet shot would you know, like a gun firing a bullet into, you know, a sitting duck like Goliath, that kind of thing, right? So I mean, we're looking at, in that context, then who really had the upper hand and who's actually at the weakness. It's really how we look at it, and knowing, acknowledging not only the strength of the opponent and the weakness of the opponent, but also the strength and weaknesses that we have, and how we can also leverage, you know, other formless, you know, formless assets that we can use to help our cause one way or another.
That's really well stated. Understanding our strengths and weaknesses is obviously a theme throughout this. But yeah, as far as the resources go, and the formless you bring up, and how resources are limited, time is one of those things that would fall into that category, because you have a limited amount of time, and that this is the kind of point of this chapter, is that you're kind of striking at the perfect time. So there's a limited amount there's a small window by which you can actually do that. So that's a resource that is actually critical, that is limited, and it is a constraint. So that's how you know, this is about maximizing or optimizing. And if you think about this in terms of how even just to optimize any action in order to exert the least amount of energy, then that would be, you know, kind of one of those things that you would absolutely have to strike at the right moment, so to speak. So I really, and that is the formless. Very much appreciate that. Yeah.
Quan was next.
Is Joe frozen? Joe is frozen, I think so.
Possibly,
Okay.
possibly.
Okay. Let's wait 10 seconds. Let's wait 10 seconds for his
It
return.
seems that Joe is frozen.
Let's
Yeah.
go with
He's
the.
very stoic.
I think you'll thaw out if
Very
you
stoic.
speak warmly. If you speak warmly, Juan, I think there's going to be no problem.
No,
Frozen in a smile.
He was testing us for our weaknesses.
Let's go with the
Seems
flow.
like you're frozen in a stoic trance.
We're just going to make fun of Joe now. I got it.
Yeah.
The happy little smile.
you know, I got to tell you, we were actually covering the Tao Te Ching in another group last night, and we were talking about humility. So I guess that's what actually you're helping me become closer. So,
Yeah.
Well, Joe, you are the
to,
most
to
humble
the Tao,
person we
to
all
the
know.
Tao. So I very much appreciate that. I did hear one or two of those comments. So, in any case, so
Joe,
I
your
feel
humility knows no bounds. We all know.
Is that a ploy to pull us out to reveal our strategy?
Exactly. Well, that's I'll see. I try. I not only read it, I practice it. So it's so I think next up is Quan.
Okay. So when you were frozen, Joe, your posture looked so natural that I hesitated for 5 seconds that you were truly
Well, you know what?
frozen.
That would actually. I wish I would have had that screenshot because you know I'm stiff otherwise. So
Yeah. Let's not exaggerate. Okay, so my small comment is about precisely the first shoe. Okay, because I think it's a good thing to talk about that again, because my pretension is that there is a true Western translation for shoe, but unhappily, sadly, is not a common word. But after all, in Chinese, shoe is not a common word either. So it's not a surprise that we need a technical or advanced word in the Western world to translate shoe. And I already said that, but it's worth taking 2-3 minutes to repeat that. And I think that word is kairos, okay? It's a Greek word, Kairos. So the translator has to decide if it's worth to use a fancy word in Greek to translate exactly shoe, because I think it's the exact translation for shoe, because the 3 layers in which kairos is present is tempus, kairos, and chronos. And that is exactly the sequence of being, kairos, and space, time, energy, matter. Okay, because chronos is space, time, energy, matter. And when guys decided to use energy to translate for shu, for me, it's not wrong, but it's a little bit weird because he used the level that is under shu to translate shu. Because if I want to translate kairos by 3 English words, because I'm not capable to find 1 English word to translate shu, it would be dynamic energy configuration. So that dynamic energy configuration, or DEC, is precisely shu, not only in nature, but most and foremost in the mind of the commander-in-chief, or in the mind of the prince, okay? Because tempus is precisely that that timeless reality, okay? Because I often come back with the notion of timeless and time, the upper trigram and the lower trigram. And shu is precisely that, because once again, in the hexagram, you have 3 lines at the lower trigram, you have a small space, and you have 3 lines in the upper trigram. And shu, you have to imagine shu like a dot at the middle of the space between the lower trigram and the upper trigram. And that from that small dot, imagine rays going from the center and radiating everywhere, like a sun, if you want, okay? Because from the upper trigram of beauty, goodness, and truth, you can go into the lower trigram of space-time, energy, matter, if you are capable in your mind to read that dynamic energy configuration. And if someone can find a word in English to translate dynamic energy configuration, that would be a fun way to replace kairos. But for me, for now, I'm still stubborn. I still think that unhappily, sadly, unfortunately, I have to resort to a fancy Greek word to translate Shu.
Juan, can I ask you something? There
Yes.
there's an old physics word during the Enlightenment when physics was really being worked out, like Newton. They used to call that internally contained, expressible, possible force an object would have when it encounters things. They called it its moment.
Yes, well, precisely. One of the translation for Shu is momentum, precisely. Momentum is not bad, but still, I have, because here, what I contend is that you have here the perfect rapprochement of Chinese philosophy and of Western philosophy. Okay, and it's not a surprise. It's difficult to translate because we are at the center of philosophy. Okay, at the center of Parmenides' paradox, that fluidity, that communication between being and phenomena, and not only limited to the mind manifestation, but here it's about the mind precisely, because we are speaking of warfare, and what is at the center of warfare is the mind of the commander-in-chief, it's the mind of the prince, of the person at the highest level of the epistemological development. And if I use again my obsessed image, the hexagram is the mind of the person at the line 5, the mind of the aristocratic man, according to Plato. Okay, so anyway, I stop here. Dynamic energy configuration or kairos is the best I can suggest for now.
Maybe I have old. Oh, so I'm sorry. Maybe I have old English professors, but kairotic moment, based off the word kairos is, I mean, it's a common usage in English to a certain degree. Kairotic moment.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Okay, so thank you for this, and I think DEC probably is a good way to abbreviate because we can.
yeah,
But anyway, thank you so much. But momentum is a good word, but momentum miss the space configuration, this part, because they all have the spatial concept on that. So sometimes they translate as a situation, right, or condition, but you also miss the dynamic part. So
But Jason, not momentum. We have momentum very specifically now, but the old term moment was
moment,
like,
then
it actually was a word we don't use that way anymore. And it sounds like time. Like, if we've turned the word into something modern.
I think we should move on.
I do want to move on, but I'm trying to wrap my head around this, the idea of momentum and how that actually factors into this whole thing when you're talking about time, and in the sense that you're actually it comes down to timing, right? And then with what level of strength do you actually move forward with at what period in time? What is the actual result of that? That's just something. Anyway, I'm thinking about it too hard, I think. So
Yeah.
Mark, go ahead.
Thanks. It's really interesting to hear everyone's different perspective. I always thought of kairos, to pick up on what Quan was saying, as important in the later Platonic corpus when he's talking in relation to both politics and ethics, of something that is the opportune time to do something or to say something, so that there's this moment, to use David's term, when it's best to act, in a sense. But what I was just going to ask about very briefly was this, when we're thinking, I really appreciate, Jason, what you said earlier about space and time, that in chapter 1, it could be that those are the elements of time that we cannot control as much as what we're talking about here, what is within the general's power to control or to at least act upon and decide upon. And I thought of the weather during D-Day. Strong winds and rough seas caused problems for the landing craft. I'm reading from the Imperial War Museum. And brought the tide in more quickly than anticipated, making the beach obstacles harder to navigate. But further postponement would have meant a 2-week delay. And on the 19th of June, there was a severe storm that hit the channel. So I'm wondering, in that case, they had to prioritize time over space, even if the waters, the winds, and so on were not in their favor. They had to go with time and not put off the time in spite of the difficulties of the space. Does that make any sense? Prioritizing time over space?
You mean in the
Are you
Arthur?
talking? Yeah,
I didn't see Sun Tzu talk about priority time over the space. I only see him put in the same way. You talk about in this chapter, right? Or you talk about in the chapter 1?
Yeah, well, I'm talking about here.
Yeah, here I think he knowing the date and knowing the time, and I don't see he prioritized time over the or which one is more important, because I'm looking at the original text. He just say knowing the place to fight, knowing the date to fight, and that he didn't say anything is more important. But I will agree with you, the time is more important, because I think at the early chapters, Sun Tzu talk about the timing, right? They talk about the timing. But just look at this paragraph. I don't see he emphasized more on time over the space. Yeah.
yeah. I can come back to it. Quan, you can go ahead.
Yeah,
Response.
a short answer. I think that he for him is equal, okay? Because I think that when he says time or space, I think we should maybe understand STEM, space, time, energy, matter. Because the difference precisely between Kairos and Chronos is that in Kairos is still in a state of virtualities. This decision has not been made yet, okay? But when it's in Chronos, it is a fixed situation, and it's the capacity to move with ease and with intelligence between the virtualities and the reality manifesting in space-time, energy, matters. And all those elements, space, time, energies, and matter, are equally important on the Chronos level. So I think it's there more the dynamic, that between the dynamic energy configuration and what is manifesting in reality at one moment.
Thank you, Juan. James.
I want to ask if I'm incorrect in assuming that this particular section only refers to place and not space.
I will agree with
Jason,
you.
yeah.
Yeah, I would say it means
So I'm kind of like taken aback by the
location.
tendency of a lot of people to universalize and not actually follow the meaning of the author.
Yeah, in this paragraph, specifically this paragraph, he's talking about the location, the pinpoint, the place to fight, I think.
Yes.
Right, knowing what's up. And I want to just comment on the Greek word kairos, because I looked it up. And in English, the English use of it means in the the Wiktionary, the English occurrence of it, which is very rare because it doesn't occur in the Oxford English Dictionary, but where it occurs in the Wiktionary in English, it's the time when conditions are right for the accomplishment of a crucial action, the opportune and decisive movement, which would be it sounds very Sun Tzu-ish. And then if I look at it in Greek, measure, proportion, fitness, advantage, profit, again, there would be a great Sun Tzu translation word if we were speaking Greek to each other. So you're right about that, Quan. I think the word sort of stands out as an art of war theme word. And I'm sure that Homer used it. That's why it's such a famous word in Greek. I'm sure that Homer used it to describe some of these voyages and battles that we know so much about.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But if I may 2 seconds, James, as you might know me, my rapprochement is much more grandiose than that. I pretend that there's a rapprochement in general philosophy between the Greek expression and the Chinese expression. I stop here before exposing my philosophical perspective.
And I always expose what I just learned or pretend to have just learned. Thank you, Quan.
So that was a interesting passage. I think we got actually a lot out of it. Yeah, and I do think that the element of space is actually maybe something that well, we could talk about it more as we work through this chapter. Would anybody like to read the next verse? James, thank you.
I'm the fastest on the button. That's all I can say.
And you read
Scheme.
well, so thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Scheme so as to discover his plans and the likelihood of their success. Rouse him and learn the principle of his activity or inactivity. Force him to reveal himself so as to find out his vulnerable spots. Carefully compare the opposing army with your own so that you may know where strength is superabundant and where it is deficient. In making tactical dispositions, the highest pitch you can attain is to conceal your dispositions, and you will be safe from the prying of the subtlest spies, from the machinations of the wisest brains. How victory may be produced for them out of the enemy's own tactics, that is what the multitude cannot comprehend. All men can see the tactics whereby I conquer, but what none can see is the strategy out of which victory is evolved. Do not repeat the tactics which have gained you one victory, but let your methods be regulated by the infinite variety of circumstances.
Very well read. Very
Oh,
well
thank
read.
you.
Thank
Thank you.
That was fantastic.
I want to thank Lionel Giles for his eloquence there.
Madeline, would you like to read your version?
Yes, although it won't be nearly as stirring as James's declamation of it.
It's correct.
Therefore-
I enjoy your voice.
Therefore, analyze the enemy's battle plan to understand its merits and its weaknesses. Provoke him to find out the pattern of his movements. Make him show himself, Xing. In my translation, it keeps including the same word in parentheses. It's in the Wade Giles transliteration. It's HSING. Provoke him to find out the pattern of his movements. Make him show himself, Xing, to discover the viability of his battle position. Skirmish with him to find out where he is wrong, where he is strong and where he is vulnerable. The ultimate skill in taking up a strategic position, Xing, is to have no form, Xing. If your position is formless, Xing, the most carefully concealed spies will not be able to get a look at it, and the wisest counselors will not be able to lay plans against it. I present the rank and file with victories gained through Yin, strategic positioning, Xing, yet they are not able to understand them. Everyone knows the position, Xing, that has won me victory, yet none fathom how I came to settle on this winning position, Xing. Thus, one's victories in battle cannot be repeated. They take their form, Xing, in response to inexhaustibly changing circumstances.
Thank you for that, Madeline. And so now we will go to Jason for his turn. Jason, could you actually put the link to your translation in the chat for everyone?
I think I already put it.
It is there, Joseph, about
Oh, it is? I'm sorry, I
5:20
didn't see it.
p.m. He posted it.
Oh, okay,
Because I just printed. So.
thank you.
Okay, so Madeline talk about the word 行. Okay, so that's this word. So you will see this paragraph. Madeline talk about 行. Okay, 行. Okay, 行. Okay, so it's another 行. Okay, that's why 行. Okay, all over the place. Okay, yes, I hope you see it. It's 行 all over the place. And in general, and again, in general, I translate this word as form or shape. It means shape or form. It's a kind of something tangible. Okay. So when I call it a form, I don't want misunderstood as a platonic form, but basics, we are talking about something visible, tangible, this kind of thing. And again, Chinese is an inflected language. So basics, this word, the exact same word can be adjective, can be verb, can be noun. Okay, so it's used all over the place, but sometimes it's used as a verb. So we call it a formation, or you form something. Okay, so that's the word. And then here use another word called formless, because the word 无形, that means no form, it's formless. So the basic, it means you are hidden, so the enemy cannot detect you. So that's the meaning of 无形. That's why it's a lot of 形 here. Okay, but compared to 是 and 虚 and 实, 形 is much easier to deal. Okay, so here Sun Tzu talk about 4 things to know. The chapter here is talk about something, what is virtual, what is real. So how do you know what is real, what is virtual? So Sun Tzu provide 4 action. Okay, in Chinese called 策, 坐, 行, and 脚. Okay, in general, we can translate as scheme or plot, and arouse, or let me see, arouse or form and compel. So therefore, plot against the enemy to know the advantage and the disadvantage of the plan. Disturb them to know the pattern of their activity and inactivity. Form your troops to know the ground of life or death. Compel them to know the area of sufficiency and insufficiency. Therefore, the highest goal is to form your troop to be formless. So here, to form the troop to be formless. Okay. As long as you are formless, their spies cannot detect anything, and their wise men cannot strategize against you. People are incapable of knowing how we can win simply by forming troops. They all know of your victories using certain forms, but don't know why we use these forms to win. Therefore, the winning tactic should not be duplicated. The forms of troops must be applied in infinite ways. And here, I think that's another Chinese language game here, because this word form means formation. And during that time, it's all used the foot soldier. So the formation, organized military, organized troops with formation is important. So the strategy or tactics usually is what kind of form of your military to use and to attack or to defend. And then I think Sun Tzu kind of played the game here. So the best form, best formation is formless. Okay, so a little bit Taoism thinking here. Okay, but I think it's a little bit he's playing the language game. So that means you have infinity number of combination to form your troops, and the best way is formless. So which there's a two sense. One is the enemy cannot detect you. The second thing is the people doesn't know how you form it because you have so many different kind of combination. So that's this paragraph is about. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Go ahead and type exclamation point in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom. So we'll start with David.
So he's been giving what in a way felt like abstract information about find their weak points, reveal them, don't reveal yourself to them. And now he's giving a practical step, how to let them show their weaknesses, their intentions, and what they'll do. Tickle the dragon's tail, it's called in some cases, and you see where it reacts. Now you know what their intentions and strategies are about, and you do this again, maintaining your secrecy, not revealing yourself, but with a deception. That's great, because this is the information strategy game in this this paragraph that we're reading. It's how to have their side reveal where their energy is. If you can't read it off the disposition, just from the spatial locations they're in, to read their strategy by just making them move. And you hide yours, you give your poker face. So you tickle the dragon and you keep your poker face. This is great. And the idea that you shouldn't repeat your old strategies, because that means you don't have an information advantages. Your strategy can be read from your form. So you have to not be repeating old ways of acting. You have to be ready to flow, even though you look the same as before. It has to be uninterpretable. This is part of your disguise. This is really cool, like on the spot advice. It's how to do a feint and how to get information out of your partner at the same time. Great.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, actually. I really liked how you connected it to the idea of flow within that context. That's really important, because essentially that you're not necessarily rigid in the way you're actually functioning. So you're not developing a pattern per se, so that you're actually just going with what the tactics require or what the situation requires. So there's an adaptability aspect to what you're talking about that's really kind of critical within that. This also
You're always watching. You're always watching them. Your information is changing as you're watching, because you're prodding them and responding. So it's there giving you new options all the time.
Yeah, and so for those of us, I'm not going to go into detail, but also used in the military for those of us who covered the OODA loop here in the past. This is directly related to that. Like you're constantly reorienting yourself based on the situation that you're in. So that's another connection, and that is in militaristic terms. One other thing that I would really think that to ask people maybe to build on a little bit is in order to draw someone out, you really have to know yourself, because otherwise you may be exposing yourself in the sense that, and this is where it comes back to previous chapters we talked about. Sun Tzu said, know your forces, understand your forces and your opponent's capabilities. And so if you don't understand yourself, you could actually end up making a pretty big mistake by trying to draw your enemy out.
Joe,
Because you could probably go ahead.
Joe, let me throw you a question, because you're an OODA loop guy. You're familiar with that. Yeah, I've heard. And just think about this in case it's not obvious, or answer the question. Is there such a thing as the OODA loop containing, in terms of military strategy, the idea of cloaking its own knowledge and hiding what it's doing as part of its own plan for success? That it should cover its own tracks as it's resolving things, so it doesn't look like it's doing what it's actually doing.
Yeah,
That's what
I mean,
he's suggesting that.
yeah, I mean, it's a constant change based off your observations. So it's a constant adaptability. So so that's where it's the observation, orient, decide, and act. So, but you're constantly reorienting, which actually should leave your opponent disoriented. And this is the whole idea that he was able to get behind. He was a fighter pilot behind other fighter pilots, and I forget the exact number of time prior. Like it was something very short amount of time. So that was actually very well done. Thank you, David. We'll go with James next.
Okay, thank you. I think that the things that stand out for me are the formation and the formlessness, and the idea of formlessness being a kind of like a great tactic to hide your formations. Keep them in order to keep them safe from the enemy. Their spies cannot detect anything. Their wise men cannot strategize against you. And it's our formations, right? That is how we win. It's the plan for the groupings of men to be effective in battle over against the whatever formations that the enemy is accustomed to using. There's also the idea of comparison here, that you compare your troops to the enemy's troops, so you know that what is insufficient on your side, what is insufficient on their side, and so forth. So the idea of like being opaque to the enemy, I think is here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really, really important. I want to just make one slight objection to the OODA loop idea. The OODA loop, goes from observation to action, and it records sort of like how we go to observation and action. We're going a little beyond that here. We're going into the idea of we're going to the idea of sophisticated formations, pre-planning, and the idea of what formations actually accomplish, the idea of subterfuge, deception, and keeping what has formed formless. So I just want to sort of like mention that, this is I think the topic here is the added dimension of actually being able to not just the individual response that's necessary for the fighter pilot, of course, but the idea of the winning tactics of the general and the necessity to disguise them, hide them, and never try to duplicate them, always have a flexibility. I wanted to ask Jason, why is there any particular reason why there is this number 1 in your script? Is it is this just a summary that you inserted?
Excuse me, you said what do you mean number 1?
I see a blue colored number 1 after number 4. Maybe.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's the okay. So usually, if you see that as a blue, that means blue is among greens amongst translation. Sometimes we have some disagreement. So I usually we resolve, and sometimes we didn't resolve. I just keep there for further reference. Okay. And usually probably not much different. If there's a much difference, I will bring up. And usually it's not much. Usually it's about the specific wording, you know.
Thank you.
We give Mark a chance to comment, but I do want to come back, James, to your Uda loop kind of to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, and just to see if we can reconcile that point. I think that that's a really interesting thing to pursue as far as the pre-planning aspect of things. Mark, go ahead.
I'm wondering, Jason, about your translation. I know that you use form all the way through. I'm looking at 627. And I know that we were talking earlier, I think David was mentioning both tactics and strategy, but kind of running them together. And I know that in the Giles translation, we have a distinction between tactics and strategy, but I think in your translation, it was just form all the way through. So I'm assuming that the same word is being used.
I'm sorry, that's I use a strategy and okay. In Giles' translation, he used strategy and tactic. Actually, that's one part I disagree. I don't use strategy. I use plan. Okay. For example, if you look at on the chapter 2, all right, and I think chapter 1, okay, it's they use the Chinese word is ji, okay. In Giles' translation, he translate as a strategy, and I translate as plan because I believe that means plan doesn't mean strategy. And then I don't think I mix with strategy and form. They should be different unless you can find a specific paragraph. And whenever they call xing, I always translate as form.
Okay, good. That's what I was asking about.
Yeah. And so, then I think that right now, because I've been working on Dao De Jing through Confucius Analect and to Art of War, I kind of develop a way to translate. I usually, a lot of time, I sacrifice the fluency of English and then sacrifice the beautiful, okay, the aesthetic part of language, try to keep consistent. So whenever you see in the sentence that Chinese have a death, okay, then I will make sure the death show up. If in the Chinese word have a woman, okay, then I will make sure some female words will show up. So that's the way I try to do it, because I believe not only the meaning, also the character also will influence what you thought. So that's why I will make sure, I try very hard to make sure if the same word used in different place, I will prefer use the same English word. And some keyword in Chinese, if they show some important word like death or a mountain, ocean, okay, I will make sure these words also show up in the English translation. So,
Yeah, and thanks for that, Jason. I'm looking at number 3. In your translation, I'm looking at the Google Doc right now. So I can't just switch back and turn my mic on and off, but people are incapable of knowing how we can win simply by forming troops. So form comes in there. They all know of our victories using certain forms, but don't know why we use these forms to win. So it's forms all the way through this verse. And plan doesn't really come into it, right? In number 4, in tactic.
Yes, they have, okay. Yeah, there's no tactic in these words. Certain form, yes, okay. Because, okay, I know, okay, let me share the screen. Thank you for bringing up this one. Because I'm so proud of what I did. That's why I like to show everyone. If you look at this one, okay, I think that's the paragraph you are talking about. In Giles' translation, okay, here, that's the sentence, okay. I translate to, they all know of our victory using certain form, but don't know why we use this form to win. Okay, how many form you have? There's a form and the form, right? 2 forms, right? And then there's okay. So here is also have 2 forms, right? So I want to make sure when they say form, I translate the form. And I think the Giles try to translate, they all know of our victory using certain forms as a strategy, because I strategize and using certain form. That's why the other translator do it this way. But I will make sure, especially for this important word like form, I will make sure, whenever the original text say form, I want to make sure the form in the English translation.
Yeah, and I guess I noticed David's note in the chat. The reason I'm kind of asking about it is because if we were going to distinguish between tactics and strategy, which it seems like Sun Tzu is not distinguishing those. If you go back to the previous verse, how victory may be produced for them out of the enemy's own tactics, I would have thought that would be strategy, not just tactics. Because if you know your enemy's strategy, which is sort of a broader plan, and you know the weaknesses of that strategy, it's more effective than if you just know the weaknesses of their tactics.
Okay, yeah, okay, good question. So, but first, I want to make sure I understand English word correctly. Strategy is on a higher level, tactics is the lower level, am I right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so the words here you talk about is mo, okay. 智者不能谋, okay, so that's why I think this one is kind of, I need to think about this one. This one, probably I should call it a tactic, but how to use verb of the, because it's a verb, okay. It's talking about the Wyson cannot plan against you. That's the English words to this, okay. Okay, so I have to admit, this word I translated to strategize. Okay, that's the one-to-one translation. I'm not sure, I should use tactic or strategize. I don't know, but I think it's more like a strategize or something like in the small scale, I try to plan something against you. Okay, and anybody can find a good English word.
I think the strategize is absolutely perfect. I mean, really perfect, Jason. I think it's that there's no, I can't think of any word that means the process or the act of tacticking. There's no such word. So in other words, planning is a little bit too dull for
Yeah, I
idea.
thought about planning, yeah, but it's a little
expression.
bit.
Yeah. So you
So-
just hit on the right combination of words there.
So you could also
even though-
argue, yeah, you could also argue that a strategy, and a tactical level plan are the same kinds of things, or an attempt to accomplish a goal. And there are small-term goals to a large-term goal. So the way to defeat a large strategy, if you know it, is to feint at tactical levels but you have to work at the tactical level too. So the advice he's giving works at both levels. So really, plan is the all-encompassing term. Defeat a plan by leading them with feints. Don't let them know but strategies and tactics, they're the typical military words, but a strategy unfolds the way a tactical plans unfold, right? There are forces applied at certain points, things evolve. So you want to apply what he's saying at both levels, don't you?
And we're talking about the villain here. So the villain doesn't have to have a really scientific analysis of what his thinking is. We can just use a word that describes it globally. He's strategizing against us, and we don't have to. We're not at this point. We're not going into the details of his scheming or feinting or whatever. We're just saying he's got some thinking that he's going to do, and it's going to be useless because of the fact that we are formless. He doesn't have any data. He doesn't know what's really going on with our formations. So so his strategies are going to come to naught. I think that's the idea here.
And I guess if you're confronting an aggressor coming into your nation or something like that, you don't necessarily have a strategy until you see what kind of attacks are entailed, so that you can form a large-scale plan to mislead them and to use their forces in these ways that are less efficient, because you can't set up a strategy and overtake their way of thinking until you see what they're thinking, right? So,
well, except that we have here we have here chapter after chapter after chapter of Sun Tzu's strategies. So I wouldn't be so base as to plan to win a war by assuming that my enemy is clueless about everything. But Sun Tzu is describing a process by which you can render the enemy unintelligent, so to speak, by remaining formless. And it is very, very Tao. It is totally.
Yeah.
and in the end, you shape your
That's a
plan.
good point.
In the end, you shape your plan almost. It can be anything in response to, because you can't predefine it if you're going to be responsive. I guess he's saying you have to allow it to take an amoebic form and just surround whatever happens.
I do think this chapter is unique when you're in using these two words. Actually, it's a little bit different when you're talking about drawing someone out.
How about scheme? Does the scheme make more sense?
No, because we don't want to debase the enemy. We want to raise the enemy's level. We want to respect the enemy. We always want to respect the enemy. I think Sun Tzu talked about in the first couple chapters. So that's not something. We don't want to call him a schemer. No.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, that probably we need to move on after Kwang. Then at least we have one more paragraph to finish.
Yeah. No, this has actually been good. I do want to come back to, and if possible, I want to come back to James's point about the OODA loop too, because I've been thinking about that. But anyway, Kwang first.
Yes, well, I think that the translation by guys is not so bad, okay, because machinations is a little bit higher than scheme, but it's not the level of strategy. And there's a synonym of machination and very close to strategy, which is stratagem. And
Yeah.
but I agree that Mao is not at the same general level than Qihua, for example. Okay, Qihua is truly a big plan, a big strategy, and I think it has been a fun discussion to distinguish between Qihua and Mao.
Yeah, stratagem actually, anyway, it comes up, it does up as a definition of scheme though, too.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
but
yeah,
but
I mean, so
it has a certain, after all, but scheme is not stratagem because in the semantic field, scheme, as James said, is would evoke the word schemer, and stratagem doesn't evoke that word, the schemer, because we all know the schemer is not exactly that someone offering a machination or stratagem. But I would say here it's an intellectual debate that I like.
it is, but it's interesting as hell, though. I mean, it's in the sense that even scheming is outwitting to I don't know, to a certain degree. But it's this is interesting. We could figure this out.
Yeah, it's
maybe
part of
afterwards.
it's part of our intellectual play when we come on Tuesday night.
Exactly.
Okay, let's finish the last paragraph.
Let's do the last paragraph. Thanks everybody for hanging in there.
Okay. Military tactics are like unto water. For water in its natural course runs away from high places and hastens downwards. So in war, the way is to avoid what is strong and to strike at what is weak. Water shapes its course according to the nature of the ground over which it flows. The soldier works out his victory in relation to the foe whom he is facing. Therefore, just as water retains no constant shape, so in warfare there are no constant conditions. He who can modify his tactics in relation to his opponent and thereby succeed in winning may be called a heaven-born captain. The 5 elements are not always equally predominant. The 4 seasons make way for each other in turn. There are short days and long. The moon has its periods of waning and waxing.
Thank you, James. Madeline, if you're still, would you be so kind as to read your version?
Sure.
Thank you.
The positioning, Xing, of troops can be likened to water. Just as the flow of water avoids high ground and rushes to the lowest point, so on the path to victory, avoid the enemy's strong points and strike where he is weak. As water varies its flow according to yin, the fall of the land, so an army varies its method of gaining victory according to yin, the enemy. Thus, an army does not have fixed strategic advantages, shi, or an invariable position, xing. To be able to take the victory by varying one's position according to yin, the enemy's, is called being inscrutable, shen. Thus, of the 5 phases, wu xing, none is the constant victor. Of the 4 seasons, none occupies a constant position. The days are both short and long. The moon waxes and wanes.
Thank you for that, Madeline. So Jason.
Yeah, okay, so last paragraph. A lot of metaphor he used here, okay? So first is the water, right? So just like Taoism, they like to use water as a metaphor. I got the Mark's point, right? So here, the word is 行, okay? But the Gaius translation to it tactic, because your tactic to form a certain formation for the troops. So that's why Gaia translate as tactic. But the actual words here in Chinese text is 行. Okay, basically talk about the 行 of troops, just like water. So the military formation is like water, for it avoid the high place and tend toward the low places. The troops form to avoid confronting the enemy's force of reality, which is a true force, instead of striking at their forces of virtuality, which is force hollow. Water shapes its courses according to the contour of the ground. The army succeeds in winning according to the enemy's profile. Here we come with the translation about weak and strong. So if we talk about water, how can water avoid the weak and avoid the strong and confront the weak? So that's a good question, but I think in Chinese it's called how do you get 避实而局急虚, okay, avoid something solid but will flow to something virtual. Okay, I think that's the my translation. Okay. Second part, therefore there is no unchanging 势. Okay, we talked about 势 on the previous chapter, the 势 of warfare. There is no unchanging shape of water. So right now, come with the 势, not only talking about the dynamic or momentum, also talking about on the shape, on the form, okay, the space. Those who succeeded according to the changes of energy are remarkable victors. So here's the word 神, okay, so that's why some translation call it heavenly or something, but I think it's use metaphor, okay, not only today, also in the ancient time, when they call 神, which means God, divine, but when you use in the as a metaphor, it means remarkable, unpredictable, super. That's the mean, In the same way, there is no victory in the dynamic relations of the 5 elements. There is no fixed position of the sun and in the 4 seasons. The daytime may be short or long. The moon may be waning or waxing. So here is talking about the change and then tied to 5 elements: water, fire, wood, metal, and earth. And I just show a quick picture about.
Oh, good.
I don't see that's exactly. I don't see Sun Tzu is talking about any specific meaning of these 5 elements. He just talking about a general idea, because 5 elements, they have like wood will kill the wood, earth will kill the water will kill the fire will kill the metal will kill the wood, and the wood will produce fire produce earth produce metal produce water produce wood. That's the cycle. So during that time, and the people have these 5 elements, they will change to each other. Just like in same as the Greek time, they have a 4 elements, they will change to different things. I think that's the same concept to deal with change, nothing specific. And the Sun Tzu just use these 5 elements and the sun and the moon and the daytime and the sun and the moon and the position of sun and the length of daytime and the evening time to represent the change, and they're talking about your to avoid your enemy know which part is virtual, which part is real. You have to mix them up and keep changing so people cannot predict what's going on in your side. I think that's what he wants to say on this one. So we finish on the chapter 6, and then we have a lot of discussion, and then next week we should go to chapter 7.
I want to keep, yeah, let's, yeah, please, David.
Right, yeah, I like what you were saying, Jason, and I think at the end, this metaphor is, it demonstrates a lot of his points in a nice way. You know, there's, like rock, paper, scissors would have been, you know, not as interesting, but the same lesson. There's no one thing in your repertoire that's going to beat everything in the other, in your opponent's repertoire. So, and what looks like the fixed elements of something are really always coming back in different degrees as you engage, and you have to be realizing what stage each thing's in. You know, if it's going to be a long night with the moon, or it's going to be cloudy, and whether you can move under cover. And so he's telling us how adaptive we have to be. You can't be assured of victory going in with the material you've got, and even nature. You're reflecting nature, which itself has what looks like these fixed elements. So one's going to be more powerful, but no, you know, nature isn't like that. So it's all in constant flux, and that's the way you have to keep yourself to be ready to engage. It's a really great metaphor, because now you're sort of, you have all the powers that are represented in earth, wind, fire, air, whatever, or metals and everything, but they're in flux, and it's going to vary. So you're pricked to remain attentive to what is today like right now. What is this moment? And this is so, and the fact that time produces this unpredictability is just it's a great thing. So thanks a lot. That was cool.
Yeah, this was cool, and I do want to come back to this because it looks familiar to something else that I was thinking about. But go ahead, Madeline.
Well, I've gotten so much out of this, so much more than I did when I was just reading it on my own. Well, I'm looking at the transition from the penultimate paragraph to the final one, talking about to be able to take the victory by varying one's position according to the enemies is called being inscrutable, Shen. Then it talks about the varying. Of the 4 seasons, none occupies a constant position. The days are both short and long. The moon waxes and wanes. So it seems as if the advice here for victory is to sit back in your own kairos and mix up the enemy's sense of chronos. In other words, to sow this sort of epistemic confusion about what's going on in the world for them in terms of time, of the big times, the seasons, the transitions of elements, the length of days, whether the moon is waxing and waning, whatever mixed signals you can feed them, whatever camouflage and trickery you can do, that's going to be the way to, I guess, penetrate their virtuality using water.
I'm still thinking about how this interact with one another, and actually I wanted to come back over with Jason in a minute. If you could go through your graphic again, because I'm trying to piece together a couple different ideas, but I'm still putting them down on the map. But James, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, I hope I can say something about that. I'm kind of, I think that was very valuable for you to drop that in, Jason, since it's mentioned. But I just wanted to emphasize that this is a negative relation. In other words, he says there's no victory in the dynamic relations of the 5 elements. So this is really the star here is water. And water is the force that avoids the high places and tends towards the low places. It flows with the enemy's force. In other words, the enemy has strengths and the enemy has weaknesses. And he's talked about this before. We have to avoid the strengths and attack the weaknesses. And this is similar to the way the water courses according to the contours of the ground. So your forces have to be trained to observe these shapes of true force and hollows, so to speak, the enemy's strengths and weaknesses. And the forces have to succeed in following the enemy's profile towards the weakness and away from the sides of power, where the enemy basically exposes blunt force. We avoid that blunt force and we move towards the weaknesses. And this is perhaps it's the shit of warfare. Or maybe this is number 2. He seems to make the emphasis. He seems to emphasize that there's no unchanging shit of warfare. There's no unchanging shape of water. So if you follow the changes of the enemy, you will be a remarkable victor, he says. So once again, water, fire, wood, Middle Earth is a wonderful model of genetic and causal change. And but this is not the main point. The main point is how water leads us to win according to the enemy's profile. And he also mentions the 4 seasons and the waxing and waning of the moon and the short and long of the day according to the seasons. So once again, the Tao is ringing through this, but so there are other analogies to be made, possibly according to the analogies of heaven and earth that are on display here in the last stanza. But nevertheless, it is the enemy's profile that determines how we use the principle of water to confront and confound the enemy effectively and win. So yeah, it's all in all, it's just a wonderful, another wonderful translation, Jason. Thanks so much.
Yeah, this one is actually, I find to be particularly interesting because it really does talk about the continuous need to change. And we're talking about this within terms of warfare, warfare. But this is also true many times in other types of situations that we're in. Like we continuously need to adapt. And if you don't adapt in some way, that ultimately that you will falter or be overtaken. And I think that what this speaks to for me is that this is talking more about the speed of adaptation than anything else when I think of water. And I really do. I do think it's similar, and I would like James to push back. I do think this is very similar to the OODA loop as to the way they approach it as well, especially with the orientation phase. It's almost an exact diagram that Jason put together for their orientation phase. It's identical. I'm still trying to contemplate what you were saying before about pre-planning and how that differed from the original example that we were talking about from number what was it, number 6? I don't know if you want to comment on that, James.
I probably do, but I'm just trying to
Let
think
Madeline-
of. Go ahead.
Let Madeline go first, and then we'll come back to it, because I've been thinking about this time and going.
Well, let's see. So to translate what I said a couple of minutes ago into OODA loop terms, it would be as if you were using your own position, your own epistemic loop to feed out disinformation to the enemy. And that entire last paragraph is about the different types of time disinformation you can send out. It can be seasonal, it can be a phase change, it can be the time of day, it can be the time of month, it can be the position. So that you're sending out that that camouflage and trickery into their own OODA loop, since the OODA loop involves theory of mind for the other person's OODA loop, assuming there's only one enemy and they only have one OODA loop as well. So you're sending out disinformation into their observe end of the OODA loop. And that's what that last paragraph is the disinformation you're sending out into their observe phase, so that when they try to orient and describe, they're getting false readings on everything. And so you have to sit into what Quan Lu so aptly described as your kairos, as your larger strategy, in order to be able to sit in that kairos, and then kind of do these little micro sendings of tactics of disinformation to the enemy's OODA loop. And while at the same time being aware that they're probably doing the same thing to you.
That's right. That's very, very well put. And actually, yeah, at the same, you're trying to distort their observation so that they then, when their orientation, they're actually disoriented and you're actually in their mind. So and there's a whole orientation framework that's totally, it's very similar to the framework of using the 5 elements of the seasons. That's when we're talking experiences and new information, and how to analyze the enemy based on all different things, cultural and other things. So yeah, anyway, Jason, go ahead. My mind is going in a couple different directions.
Okay,
I shouldn't be taking it here because it's too specific.
Yeah, I probably need to leave in about a few minutes. So
Sure.
I like to make the last paragraph a little bit clear, because I don't want you think about I think probably let me go back to this paragraph. the last sentence. Okay, so if you look at the Chinese text, okay, I hope if even you don't know Chinese, but you can see they are the same word. You see this one called gu. You see this word all start with this gu. Okay, okay, and here also gu. Okay, also gu. Okay, okay, these words, it means therefore. But in the ancient time, they confuse with another word, means because. So because and therefore is the same word, okay? Or this and, they're all in the same word. So sometimes I don't know how to translate because sounds redundant. Because in the Western training world, in our mind, how can you confuse the therefore and the because that's the opposite. But it seems not that important in the ancient time. Okay, so if you read this one carefully by putting this logic word together, so the first sentence talking about the metaphor, the formation of military just like water, and it's attacked the solid, avoid the solid part and attack the virtual part. Therefore, okay, I believe this word means therefore. When you form a military, you should be like water, and then you change accordingly so you can win. This one is remarkable victory. Okay. The second one probably doesn't mean therefore. That means because for the same reason. They try to use the natural phenomena to back up this theory. So they say, see, in the natural world, that the five elements, they kill each other. Okay, the metal kill the wood, wood kill the earth, earth kill, but there's no constant winner, depending on the situation. The sun on the four season never be in the same position because depend on the time of the year, the sun occupied a different place. The day sometimes long, sometimes short. And the moon is full moon or waning or waxing. So that's the natural world. So you probably can understand. I try to translate this one as in the same word, but in the Chinese they all in the same word, but they have a different meaning on that. So that's my understanding. I will read as first sentence is talking about the metaphor. The military formation just like water. And the second one talk about therefore, based on this theory, you should form your military in this way, then you can win. And the last one talking about in the same way, give you the reason because they follow the natural phenomenon. So that's the natural phenomenon. So I think I want to make it a little bit clear on the last paragraph. So, I hope I thought that we were finished early, but turned out that we finished late. So,
it was a great conversation, and
the
especially
lesson I learned is the longer the paragraph, the shorter time we need, and the shorter the paragraph, we need the longer time. So it's really depends on the shi of the audience. We don't know. So anyway, I probably have to leave in about 5-10 minutes, and then next week, same time, and we will move to the new chapter, which is the military striving. Okay, so you will see it's it's too late to say whether or not we go to the war or not. It's already decided, the decision already made. It's too late to change your mind. So right now, it's only thing you need to do is winning the war. Okay, so right now, step by step, is going to the battlefield from now on. Yeah. So
I'm going to let Madeline jump the line because she has a specific question regarding the translation.
Yeah, it's, I wanted to ask it before you left, Jason. It's about the translation. In the blue writing, which is green,
This one?
yep, it
Okay.
talks about the true force in 6:1. The true force and the force's hollows. Up until, no, you have it.
6-7, Jason.
Oh, this one. Okay. Force hollow. Yeah.
Yep, so the true force and the force's hollows. Up until now, I had been thinking in terms of the egg and the stone.
Mhm.
But now I'm looking at this as one force with hollows in it, more like a sponge or an interpenetrating thing that contains both solids and voids
Okay.
within it.
Let me put this way. Okay. So you still, I think everybody has a different mind. Okay. When you read the Meta English Chinese, we all have a different picture in our mind. My mind is like this. The water, you see, if in the, let's imagine on the stream, they have the egg and the pebble in the water. When the water flow, okay, the pebble is heavy and the egg, let's assume the egg is rotten egg, so it's hollow inside. Okay, they look the same, but the water flow and the pebble is not going to move, but the hollowed egg, okay, is going to move. That's in my image, in my imaging. That's what I'm thinking. Okay, this text is talking about, because one is solid, one is hollowed, and when water flow, when you use eyeball, you cannot tell the difference between pebble and the egg. But when water flow, you will know the egg will move and the pebble is not going to move. That's the image I have. Does that make sense?
Yes, thanks. I was thinking of something more like the entirety of the force being more like a foam, or like a one of those conglomerates that are made of different types of crushed stone. But let's say some of them are hollow and some of them are solid.
Mhm.
And it's up to you to figure out, in terms of the enemy, that it would be one contiguous mass, and you would have to figure out which were the pebble and which were the egg.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah, and the water was the best way to figure out. If you have the water rush run through the water, you will know, which one is the egg, which one is the pebble.
thank you.
This is actually making so much more sense too, as far as drawing your enemy.
That's why I think the best translation is the egg and the pebble.
That is the beauty of this discussion. James, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, this is just to answer your inquiry, mostly to answer your inquiry, Joseph, although that, I think what I think what Madeline was bringing up